What drives a person to step into a world that seems far too big for them? Is it courage, or is it simply love? An 8-year-old girl who, in an act of courage, enters the powerful corporate headquarters of Sterling Global to stand in for her mother, Olivia Carter, who is in the hospital and couldn't attend a job interview. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. On a crisp autumn morning, while the city pulsed with its usual rhythm of traffic, meetings, and endless ambition, an 8-year-old girl stood outside the towering glass building of Sterling Global. Her small hands clutched a folder tightly against her chest. Her shoes, slightly worn but polished with care, tapped nervously against the marble floor as she entered the vast lobby. Her name was Olivia Carter. The lobby, with its echoing ceilings and cold steel beams, seemed almost designed to intimidate. Businessmen and women hurried past her, their eyes fixed on phones and briefcases, oblivious to the little figure who seemed almost out of place. Yet, there was a quiet determination in Olivia's eyes, a determination too mature for her tender age. At the reception desk sat Helen Porter, a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a reputation for order. She barely glanced up before asking, "Can I help you?" Olivia took a deep breath. "Yes, ma'am, I'm here for an interview." Helen frowned, adjusting her glasses. "An interview? Sweetheart, this is a corporate headquarters, not—" "It's for my mother," Olivia interrupted gently, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry across the polished desk. She opened the folder and placed it carefully on the counter. "Her name is Olivia Carter. She was supposed to be here today, but she's in the hospital. She couldn't come, so I came instead." The room seemed to pause for a moment. Even the sound of hurried footsteps softened, as though the building itself was listening. Helen's stern expression wavered into confusion, then concern. "You came alone?" she asked. Olivia nodded. "Yes, I know I'm little, but I can explain everything. My mom is the best at what she does. She really needs this job." Helen blinked, unsure what to do. She glanced toward the elevators where executives in suits disappeared onto higher floors. A voice in her head told her to politely escort the girl out. But another voice whispered that something extraordinary was happening here. And then, as if fate itself had arranged it, Jonathan Blake, the CEO of Sterling Global, entered the lobby. Jonathan was a man in his early 60s, tall, with silver hair that carried both authority and a quiet heaviness. People often described him as unshakable, someone who had built his empire on discipline, strategy, and an unwavering sense of control. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay scars he rarely allowed the world to see. He noticed the unusual scene immediately, a child standing at the reception desk, speaking with conviction far beyond her years. Curious, he slowed his pace. "What's going on here, Helen?" His deep voice cut across the marble lobby. Helen hesitated, then gestured toward Olivia. "Mr. Blake, this young lady says she's here for her mother's interview." Jonathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He turned to Olivia, who met his gaze without flinching. "And what's your name?" he asked. "Olivia Carter," she replied softly. "And why are you here, Olivia?" She held the folder tighter. "Because my mom couldn't come. She's in the hospital. But she worked so hard on this. She deserves a chance. So, I came to tell you about her." Jonathan's instinct told him to dismiss the matter, to remind the girl that life doesn't bend to sentiment. But something in her voice, something in the quiet bravery of standing there alone, struck him. It was the kind of courage born not of choice, but of necessity. He took a long breath, then did something he rarely did, broke protocol. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let's talk in my office." Gasps echoed softly among the staff who watched from a distance. The CEO of Sterling Global, a man known for his cold precision, was inviting a child into the inner sanctum of his corporate fortress. Olivia followed, her small footsteps echoing beside his polished shoes. As the elevator doors closed, silence filled the space between them. Jonathan glanced at her. "Do you know what people call me, Olivia?" She shook her head. "They call me ruthless. A man who never lets feelings interfere with business. Do you think I should listen to you?" Olivia looked up, her eyes bright and unafraid. "If you don't, you'll never know how amazing my mom is." Jonathan blinked. He hadn't expected such a simple, piercing answer. For the first time in a long while, he felt something shift inside him. And so, the story began. Not with a boardroom decision, nor with a $1 million contract, but with the courage of a child who believed her mother deserved a chance. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths, and sometimes the courage of a child is enough to pierce the armor of even the hardest heart. What does it mean to truly listen? Is it hearing words, or is it recognizing the story behind them? Inside the sleek elevator, Olivia Carter stood next to Jonathan Blake, the man whose decisions could shift entire markets. The hum of the rising lift was steady, yet the silence between them carried more weight than steel cables. Olivia clutched the folder tighter, as if it were both her shield and her weapon. When the doors opened to the executive floor, the difference was stark. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee. Tall windows bathed the hallway in morning light, illuminating modern art pieces that seemed to belong in a gallery. Employees glanced up with wide eyes as their CEO walked by, with a child by his side. Jonathan led her into his office, a spacious room with glass walls overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, reminding Olivia just how small she was in a world built for giants. Yet her courage refused to shrink. "Sit down," Jonathan said, gesturing toward a leather chair across from his imposing desk. He loosened his tie slightly, a rare gesture for him, and studied the girl. "Now, tell me why you thought it was a good idea to come here." Olivia sat, her legs dangling above the floor. She placed the folder carefully on the desk. "Because my mom couldn't, and because if she didn't try, she'd lose hope. I couldn't let that happen." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Lose hope? She's an adult. Adults should know how to face disappointment." "She does," Olivia replied quickly, her voice steady despite the fear swimming in her chest. "But she also knows how to keep going. She always tells me, 'Olivia, life will try to knock you down, but you stand up twice as strong.'" She paused, her eyes glistening. She's been standing up so many times lately. I thought maybe someone could give her a hand this time." The words pierced deeper than Jonathan expected. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second before he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Tell me about her. Not just what's on this paper. Tell me who your mother really is." And Olivia did. She spoke of late nights when Laura worked 2 part-time jobs while still making sure Olivia had dinner on the table. She described mornings filled with laughter, even when money was scarce. She told him about her mother's certifications, the long hours spent studying after putting Olivia to bed, and the countless rejections she faced in interviews where her being a single mother was treated like a flaw. Jonathan listened in silence, his jaw tightening. Each detail chipped away at the wall he had built over decades, a wall of rules, numbers, and indifference. He thought of his own late wife, of his daughter he never had the chance to raise. Memories long buried pressed against his composure, but he kept them locked inside. "And why," Jonathan asked finally, "does she want this job so badly?" Olivia hesitated. "Because she needs the health insurance. The hospital bills are too much. She got sick last month, really sick. She tried to hide it from me, but I heard her crying at night. She said she didn't know how we'd pay, so she applied here. She said this was her last chance." Jonathan looked down at the folder. The resume was flawless. Years of experience, advanced qualifications, glowing references. On paper, Laura Carter was exactly the kind of professional Sterling Global would hire. Yet she had been overlooked, discarded like many others who didn't fit the rigid mold of the corporate world. He exhaled slowly. "Do you realize, Olivia, that this isn't how things are done? You're not supposed to be here." Olivia nodded. "I know. But sometimes rules don't work for people like us." Sometimes you have to do something different." Her words struck him like a quiet thunderclap. He leaned forward, studying the girl as if she held a secret no adult had ever dared to share. For the first time in years, Jonathan allowed himself to smile, barely noticeable but real. "You're brave," he said softly. "Braver than most of the executives who walk through these doors." Olivia's shoulders relaxed just a little. "Does that mean you'll give her a chance?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Cars moved like streams of ants, people rushing to places that felt important in the moment, but often meant nothing in the end. He thought about choices, about losses, about the burden of power. Finally, he turned back. "I'll need to meet your mother first, but yes, Olivia, I'll give her a chance." The girl's eyes lit up, tears threatening to spill. She clasped her hands together tightly, as though holding on to hope itself. Jonathan walked to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Helen, clear my schedule for the rest of the morning." There was a pause on the other end. "The entire morning, sir?" "Yes," Jonathan said firmly. His eyes never left Olivia. "I have something more important to do today. Rules keep the world running, but compassion keeps it alive. And sometimes bending the rules is the only way to remind ourselves that people matter more than protocol." What do we truly see when we step into a hospital room? Is it weakness, or is it the quiet strength of someone still fighting? The sleek black car stopped in front of St. Joseph's Medical Center, its polished exterior reflecting the gray sky above. Olivia pressed her forehead against the window, her small hands gripping the leather seat. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and fear. Sitting beside her, Jonathan Blake remained unusually silent, his sharp features softened by thought. He had canceled a morning filled with high-stakes meetings and billion-dollar negotiations to do something he hadn't done in years: follow his heart instead of his schedule. As the driver opened the door, Olivia jumped out quickly, tugging Jonathan by the sleeve. "This way. I know where she is." Inside the hospital, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. The echo of rolling carts and distant beeping machines created a rhythm that was both unsettling and oddly soothing. Jonathan's polished shoes clicked against the linoleum floor, a sound so out of place in the worn corridors. They reached room 312. Olivia paused at the doorway, her small hand trembling on the handle. She glanced up at Jonathan, her eyes wide. "She doesn't know I came to see you. Please, don't be mad at her. It was all my idea." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "I'll remember that." Olivia pushed open the door. The room was modest, filled with the faint hum of medical equipment. Laura Carter lay propped against thin hospital pillows, her skin pale, her dark hair pulled back hastily. A notebook rested on her lap, filled with scribbled notes and reminders. Proof that even illness couldn't keep her from thinking about work and responsibility. Her eyes widened in shock as soon as she saw Olivia enter, followed by the imposing figure of Jonathan Blake. "Olivia Grace Carter!" Laura's voice cracked between anger and disbelief. "What on earth? How did you—" She began coughing, a deep rattling sound that made Olivia rush to her side. "Mom, please don't be upset," Olivia pleaded. "I just wanted to help." Laura looked at Jonathan, her expression horrified. "Mr. Blake, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she shouldn't have bothered you. Please forgive her." Jonathan raised a hand gently, silencing her. "Mrs. Carter, you have nothing to apologize for. Your daughter only did what she believed was right. Frankly." He allowed himself the smallest smile. "She impressed me." Laura blinked, stunned. "Impressed you?" "Yes," Jonathan said firmly. He stepped closer, his voice steady but warm. "She told me about your qualifications, about your work ethic, about your sacrifices, and now I see where she learned her courage." Tears gathered in Laura's eyes. I just wanted a chance. But companies don't look kindly on single mothers. I've lost count of the times they've seen my status as a liability instead of strength." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Her words echoed painfully within him, stirring memories he had buried deep. His late wife, Eleanor, turned away from opportunities after their daughter was born. The cruel irony that her last desperate attempt for a job had ended in tragedy, the day she and their child never came home. He cleared his throat, grounding himself in the present. You've faced rejection not because of your talent, but because of prejudice. That ends here. I want to offer you a position at Sterling Global. Laura gasped. You… What? You heard me, Jonathan said, his voice calm but resolute. Not as charity, not as pity, but because your daughter reminded me that real strength often wears an ordinary face. You belong with us. For a moment, the room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor. Olivia's face lit up with uncontainable joy. She threw her arms around her mother, whispering, "See, Mom, I told you." Laura's lips trembled. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Jonathan replied softly. Her eyes searched his as though trying to uncover the reason behind this act of kindness. She sensed there was more to the man than his reputation of steel and stone. Something broken, something healing. Finally, she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, thank you." Jonathan inclined his head. "Good, then rest. We'll handle the details when you're stronger." As he turned to leave, Olivia ran to him. "Mr. Blake?" He paused. "Thank you for believing in her." Jonathan looked down at the little girl, his heart tightening in a way he hadn't felt in years. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Don't thank me, Olivia. Thank yourself. You were the one brave enough to start this." They left the hospital room together, the gray skies outside already seeming a little lighter. In the quiet corners of suffering, there is often a strength invisible to the world, and sometimes, all it takes is one act of faith to turn a hospital room into a place of new beginnings. A single decision, born inside a quiet hospital room, had begun to ripple outward. Jonathan Blake sat in his office the next morning, staring at the city skyline. Sterling Global's headquarters towered over Manhattan, its glass walls reflecting ambition and power. Yet for the first time in years, Jonathan wasn't thinking about profits or mergers. He was thinking about a little girl's courage and her mother's tears. The memory of Laura Carter's frail smile and Olivia's hopeful eyes lingered like an echo. He knew what he had to do. "Get the executive team in here," he instructed his assistant. His voice was sharp as always, but beneath it lay an unspoken urgency. Minutes later, the boardroom filled with Sterling's most powerful figures, men and women in tailored suits, holding tablets and papers, ready to discuss numbers and strategies. Jonathan entered without his usual armor of detachment. He placed a folder on the table, its cover marked with two simple words: "Family first." "What's this?" asked Gregory Shaw, his longtime CFO. His tone was skeptical, almost defensive. Jonathan fixed him with a calm, steady gaze. "It's our future." He began to speak, his voice carrying an intensity that silenced the room. "For too long, we've measured people by how much they can give us, without ever asking what they're carrying. I met a woman yesterday, intelligent, qualified, resilient, who was rejected time and again because she was a single mother. Because she had responsibilities outside of work, responsibilities that make her stronger, not weaker." Some of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Jonathan continued, his words gaining force. "How many talented people have we overlooked? How many brilliant minds never walked through these doors because we decided their family made them a liability? That ends today. I will not let Sterling Global stand for exclusion when it can stand for hope." He opened the folder, sliding documents across the table. "This is the family first policy. Paid parental leave, flexible hours, healthcare that actually serves families, mentorship for single parents, and career development programs that don't punish those raising children alone. We will lead by example. We will prove that compassion and profit are not enemies." The room was silent. Finally, Gregory leaned forward. "Jonathan, this isn't how we've done things. Investors might see this as weakness. It's risky." Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his reply was steady. "The greater risk is becoming a company without a soul. If investors can't see the value of human dignity, then we'll find new investors. His words cut through the tension like glass. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt something inside him shift. Not anger, not grief, but conviction. Eleanor's face flickered in his memory. Her smile, her voice, the life they had almost built together. This policy wasn't just for Laura, it was for Eleanor. It was for every parent who had been told they didn't belong. At the end of the meeting, the room erupted in quiet murmurs of agreement. A few resisted, but most saw the fire in Jonathan's eyes and understood this wasn't a suggestion. It was a promise. As the executives left, Jonathan remained alone at the head of the table. He picked up the folder again, running his hand over the words, "Family First." For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the ruthless CEO that the world feared. He felt like a man who had finally remembered why he built everything in the first place. And somewhere across the city, a little girl would soon learn that her bravery had changed not just her mother's life, but the lives of thousands of families she had never met. A single act of kindness can grow into a movement. Sometimes, it takes the innocence of a child to remind the powerful of their humanity. 2 weeks after the Family First policy was unveiled, Jonathan Blake found himself walking into a different kind of meeting. This wasn't a boardroom filled with investors or executives. It was a small, sunlit conference room prepared for just 3 people: Jonathan, Laura Carter, and her daughter Olivia. Jonathan adjusted his tie, feeling a rare unease. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but this encounter stirred something deeper. He wasn't just a CEO today. He was a man about to face the very people who had inspired him to change an empire. The door opened gently, and Laura stepped in, her hand resting lightly on Olivia's shoulder. Laura still carried the weariness of recent hospital stays, but her posture had a quiet dignity. Olivia, in her neat dress and polished shoes, looked around with wide eyes before spotting Jonathan. "Mr. Blake," Laura said softly, her voice edged with both gratitude and uncertainty. "Laura, Olivia," Jonathan greeted, his tone warmer than either expected. He gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit." As they settled in, Olivia placed the same folder she had once carried into the sterling lobby on the table. Jonathan noticed and smiled faintly. "You kept it," he said. Olivia nodded proudly. "It's what started everything, right?" Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "Yes, it is. Sometimes the smallest things have the biggest consequences." Laura looked down at her hands, then back at him. "Mr. Blake, I don't know how to thank you. I've read about the policy. People are already talking about it. You changed so much for so many families, all because of one reckless little girl." She glanced at Olivia with a mother's mix of exasperation and love. Olivia giggled, swinging her legs under the chair. "It wasn't reckless, it was brave." Jonathan chuckled, a sound that startled even him. "She's right. It was brave, and it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Why people matter more than numbers." Laura's eyes softened. "You could have turned her away that day. Most CEOs would have." Jonathan's gaze grew distant for a moment. "I almost did. But when I looked at her, I saw more than a child with a folder. I saw hope. And I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore." Silence filled the room, gentle but heavy with meaning. Then Jonathan leaned forward. "Laura, Sterling Global would be honored to have you on our team. Not because of pity, not because of what happened, but because you are talented, determined, and the kind of person this company needs." Laura's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Olivia clapped her hands together, grinning from ear to ear. "See, Mom, I told you." Jonathan smiled at her enthusiasm, and for the first time in many years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. As they left the conference room, Jonathan lingered by the window, watching them walk down the corridor hand in hand. Something stirred deep within him, a quiet longing he hadn't felt since Eleanor's absence. Maybe, just maybe, this was more than corporate reform. Maybe this was the beginning of healing, not only for Sterling Global, not only for Laura and Olivia, but for himself. Sometimes change begins in policy. Other times it begins in the heart, and often it takes the courage of ordinary people to remind us that both are possible. Sterling Global had always been a fortress of glass and steel, admired for its power but feared for its coldness. Yet in the weeks following the launch of the Family First policy, something subtle but unmistakable began to shift within its walls. The lobby, once a place of rushing footsteps and hushed ambition, now occasionally echoed with the laughter of children. Parents no longer hid their struggles in silence. Instead, they found support in new programs that gave them room to breathe. The break rooms buzzed with conversations not just about deadlines, but about birthdays, school plays, and the little victories of everyday life. Employees who had once felt invisible suddenly stood taller. Single mothers spoke openly of their challenges. Fathers took time off to be present for their families without fearing the loss of their careers. The company that had once measured success only in profit margins was discovering a different kind of wealth: trust, loyalty, and gratitude. Jonathan Blake watched all of this unfold with quiet wonder. From his office, he often paused to look down at the people who worked for him, noticing how their smiles reached their eyes in a way they hadn't before. It was a sight he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. But transformation was not without resistance. One afternoon, Gregory Shaw, the CFO, entered Jonathan's office carrying a thick folder. "The numbers are in," he said, his voice clipped. "Yes, morale is up. Retention has improved. But some investors are calling this a distraction. They want assurances." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but firm. "And what do you think, Gregory?" The older man hesitated, then sighed. "I think I was wrong. I didn't believe in this at first, but I've seen the change. I've seen what it's done. Maybe this company needed more than numbers." Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. We all did. Meanwhile, Laura Carter had begun her new role in the company. Balancing her job with caring for Olivia was still a challenge, but for the first time she felt supported rather than punished for being a mother. Her talent quickly shone, and colleagues respected her determination. For Olivia, Sterling Global became more than just a skyscraper in the city. It became a place of possibility. She often visited her mother after school, and every time she entered the lobby, the staff greeted her like family. To them, she wasn't just the girl who once carried a folder. She was the spark that had changed the heart of an empire. One evening, as Jonathan prepared to leave, he found Olivia waiting for her mother in the reception area, coloring quietly in a notebook. He walked over, curious. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Olivia held up the page. It was a picture of a tall building with people smiling in its windows. Above it, in big letters, she had written, "The place that cares." Jonathan's throat tightened. He crouched down beside her. "That's what we're trying to build," he said softly. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You already did." And in that moment, Jonathan realized the truth. The policy wasn't just changing Sterling Global, it was changing him. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a man trapped in the shadows of his past. He felt like a man stepping into the light. True change doesn't happen in a single moment. It grows in ripples, through lives touched, hearts opened, and hope restored. And often, the smallest hands create the widest waves. Autumn settled deeper into the city, painting the trees along Central Park with amber and crimson. Jonathan Blake found himself walking there more often than usual, sometimes alone, sometimes in quiet company. It was here, beneath the whispering leaves, that he began to feel the past loosening its grip on him. One Saturday afternoon, Laura Carter invited him to join her and Olivia for a picnic. At first, he hesitated. CEOs didn't take picnics. They attended conferences, signed contracts, and kept their distance. But Olivia's eager smile had a way of dismantling his excuses. They spread a blanket near the lake where children-fed ducks and joggers passed by with easy laughter. Jonathan sat stiffly at first, unsure of how to fit into something so simple. But Olivia solved that problem quickly. "Mr. Blake, you have to try Mom's apple pie," she insisted, pushing a paper plate toward him. "It's the best in the world." Jonathan took a cautious bite, then another. His eyes widened slightly. "She might be right," he admitted. Laura chuckled, her face softening. "Don't encourage her too much, or she'll have me baking every weekend." For a moment, they weren't CEO and employee, or a child who had walked into a skyscraper against all odds. They were just three people sharing food beneath the autumn sun. Later, Olivia skipped away to play nearby, leaving Jonathan and Laura in the gentle hush of the park. She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You've done so much for us," she said quietly. "I still don't fully understand why." Jonathan's gaze followed Olivia as she laughed with another child. His voice was lower when he answered, "Because once I lost everything I loved, and I swore I'd never let myself feel that kind of loss again. But your daughter, she reminded me that protecting myself wasn't living, it was hiding." Laura didn't press him, but her silence was full of understanding. That night, Jonathan returned to his penthouse. The rooms, vast and gleaming, echoed with emptiness. For years, he had believed this was the price of power: silence, isolation, detachment. But after an afternoon of laughter and apple pie, the silence felt heavier than ever. He walked into a room he rarely entered, a study lined with books, where a framed photograph sat tucked away in a drawer. With trembling hands, he pulled it out. It was a picture of Eleanor. Her warm eyes, her easy smile, the woman he had once dreamed of building a family with. Beside her was their daughter, Lily, no more than 5 years old, frozen in time by a camera and fate. Jonathan pressed the photo to his chest. For years, he had buried this pain under work, building walls of glass and steel around a heart that refused to heal. But now, with Laura's quiet strength and Olivia's fearless hope, those walls were beginning to crack. The next morning, he called Gregory Shaw into his office. "I want to set aside funds," Jonathan said firmly. "For a foundation, one that supports single parents and children who need opportunities. This isn't just about Sterling Global anymore. It's about something larger." Gregory raised his brows. "A foundation? Jonathan, are you sure?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, his voice steady. "It's time I stop running from the past. It's time I do something with it." And so, what began as the bravery of a little girl at a reception desk was beginning to ripple outward in ways no one could yet measure. We carry the weight of yesterday, but healing begins when we dare to share that burden with others. In every broken heart lies the chance to build something new, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it with hope. Autumn settled over the city, painting the skyline with gold and crimson hues. For Jonathan Blake, the season mirrored the stage of life he found himself in, past the fire of youth, standing at the edge of legacy. The family-first policy had taken root, but with its growth came new challenges. Sterling Global was no longer just a corporation, it was a symbol, and symbols attracted scrutiny. Media outlets praised the company for its humanity, while others accused it of masking profit motives with sentimentality. Competitors watched with wary eyes, some adopting similar measures, others waiting for Sterling to stumble. Jonathan carried all of it heavily. In the quiet hours of night, he often found himself in his study, sifting through old photographs. One picture, worn at the edges, showed him as a boy beside his father, a man of towering presence but cold restraint. His father had believed in building empires, not homes. For decades, Jonathan had followed that path, until now. Laura Carter was thriving in her role, yet her rise reminded Jonathan of the untapped potential Sterling had wasted for years. She worked late, her office light often the last one glowing when he left. But unlike before, she wasn't fueled by fear. She was driven by purpose, and that difference radiated in her work. Olivia, too, had become something of a quiet celebrity in the building. Employees left small notes on her drawings, encouraging her to keep creating. Her simple vision of "the place that cares" had become an unofficial slogan whispered through the halls. Still, not everyone embraced the change. At a board meeting, an influential investor challenged Jonathan openly. "Mr. Blake, your vision is admirable, but investors don't live on good intentions. Where is the guarantee this philosophy will sustain growth?" Jonathan's reply was steady, though his heart pounded. "Growth built on fear collapses in silence. Growth built on loyalty endures for generations. That's the guarantee." The room fell quiet. Some nodded, others frowned. But Jonathan knew this was the line he had to hold. That evening, as he walked through the lobby, he saw Olivia again, this time reading aloud to a group of children whose parents had been invited for a company family event. He stopped in the shadows, listening to her small but confident voice filling the space that once echoed with nothing but ambition. A thought stirred inside him, equal parts ache and hope. This is the legacy I was meant to leave. Not buildings, not profits, but a culture where people remembered they mattered. As he stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, Jonathan realized he was no longer just leading a company. He was mending a lineage, his father's, his own, and perhaps through small ripples, the world's. Legacies are not carved in stone or written in ledgers. They live in people, in the laughter of children, in the courage of parents, in the choices of leaders willing to break old chains. The truest inheritance is not wealth, but hope. Winter crept over the city, leaving frosted windows and quiet streets in its wake. Inside Sterling Global, tension hung heavier than the cold. Jonathan Blake had weathered skepticism, whispers, and cautious praise. But now he faced his greatest challenge yet, a direct threat to everything he had built. The board had called an emergency meeting. Gerald Harrington, the former CEO and longtime rival, had rallied a faction of conservative members intent on dismantling the family-first policy. They accused Jonathan of letting sentiment override strategy, claiming the company's future was at risk. Jonathan entered the boardroom, where icy stares and folded arms greeted him. Among them, Victoria Sloan, the director of HR, sat poised like a viper, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sharp with judgment. "Jonathan," Harrington began, his voice smooth but venomous, "your personal attachments are clouding your judgment. Sterling Global cannot be led by nostalgia or sentiment. We demand that you suspend this policy and reallocate key staff, including Ms. Carter." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but the audacity of their attack stirred a fire he hadn't felt in years. "The family-first policy is not about me. It's about people, families, employees, children who deserve a chance. It's about integrity." Harrington leaned in, eyes narrowing. "And yet you've allowed a child to influence corporate decisions. Is this the leadership we want?" Silence filled the room. Jonathan's gaze shifted to Laura, seated quietly but unwavering, and to Olivia, who had been brought along at her mother's request. The child's wide eyes held no fear, only quiet courage. Then Jonathan spoke, steady and resolute. "It was a child's courage that reminded me of the humanity we often overlook. And it is that humanity which will carry Sterling Global forward. Not fear, not control, not the ghosts of old leadership." Victoria's hand twitched toward her tablet. Jonathan noticed a sudden chill running through him. Before she could act, Janet, his assistant, discreetly slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside were documents revealing Victoria's covert manipulation. She had leaked confidential information to the press in an attempt to destabilize Jonathan and turn the board against him. He cleared his throat. "It appears we have more than a policy disagreement here. This isn't strategy, it's sabotage." Gasps rippled through the room. Victoria's face paled and Harrington's smug confidence faltered. Jonathan continued, his voice calm but piercing. "Sterling Global stands for fairness, integrity, and opportunity. Anyone who undermines these principles will not remain in this company." The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Votes were taken swiftly. Victoria Sloan was removed from her position, and Harrington's motion to suspend the policy was overwhelmingly rejected. The room, once tense and hostile, now breathed with the relief of justice served. Later, Jonathan walked the halls with Laura and Olivia. The child's hand slipped into his as if to anchor him to the world beyond politics and power. "See, Mom," Olivia said softly. "Courage wins." Jonathan smiled, a quiet weight lifting from his shoulders. "Yes, Olivia, it does." And in that moment, Jonathan understood that leadership wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about facing them with integrity, protecting those who dared to hope, and never forgetting the spark that started it all. True courage is revealed not in safety, but in adversity. Standing up for what is right, even when threatened, creates ripples that outlast fear, reshaping lives, hearts, and legacies. Spring arrived slowly over the city, softening the edges of winter's harshness. The sun warmed the glass towers of Sterling Global, reflecting a promise of renewal. Inside, the energy was different, lighter, purposeful, and infused with hope. Jonathan Blake stood in the lobby, watching employees greet each other with laughter and recognition. Children ran through the corridors during the company's new family hours, their giggles weaving into the rhythm of a workplace that had once been rigid and silent. The Family First policy was no longer just a guideline, it was the heartbeat of the company. Laura Carter, now a respected leader within Sterling, moved confidently through the office, balancing meetings and mentorship with the same grace that had first inspired Jonathan. Olivia trailed beside her, notebook in hand, eagerly sketching ideas for employee initiatives and community projects. Jonathan's gaze softened as he approached them. "How's our chief inspiration today?" he asked, crouching to Olivia's level. Olivia grinned. "Busy making sure everyone is happy, Mr. Blake. Like you said, it's not just work, it's people." He nodded, feeling the full weight and beauty of that truth. "Exactly. And it's up to all of us to remember that." That afternoon, Jonathan gathered the entire company in the main atrium for the launch of the Reynolds Family Foundation, an initiative dedicated to supporting working parents, single mothers, and children seeking opportunities. Laura would serve as the executive director, Olivia as the chief testing officer, an honorary role, but one that symbolized the spark that had ignited it all. The audience, a mixture of employees, family members, and board members, listened intently as Jonathan spoke. "Years ago, I built walls around my heart," he began, voice steady and resonant. "I thought leadership meant control, isolation, and perfection. But one small act, a child's courage, taught me otherwise. True leadership is about humanity. It is about hope. It is about family." Applause filled the atrium, warm and unreserved. Jonathan looked toward Laura and Olivia, their faces radiant with pride. For the first time in decades, he felt complete, not as a CEO, not as a strategist, but as a man who had found his purpose beyond the ledger, beyond the office walls, beyond the past. As the ceremony concluded, Olivia tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Blake, do you think we can make other companies like Sterling global?" Jonathan smiled, kneeling beside her. "We can. One act at a time. One family at a time. One heart at a time." The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the atrium. In that glow, the walls of Sterling Global seemed less imposing and more welcoming, a symbol of change, courage, and enduring hope. Jonathan watched Laura and Olivia walk ahead, hand in hand, toward a future they had helped shape. And in that moment, he understood that life's greatest victories weren't measured in wealth or titles. They were measured in love, compassion, and the courage to make a difference. Every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. Courage, compassion, and unwavering belief in others create ripples that extend far beyond a single act, shaping legacies and inspiring generations to come.